Senator John Kennedy is convinced something very sinister is going on between George Soros and the media outlets that he just purchased. You guys got to see his theory.
Mr. President, last week, President Biden, I wish him well, gave his farewell address to America. He said a number of things, but one in particular got my attention. He warned America about, quote, his words, not mine, quote, a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of very few ultra-wealthy people. President Biden went on to say, and I quote again, today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead, end quote. Now, I don't know who President Biden was talking about. But I know one particular circumstance about which I'm going to speak that fits his warning. Again, I don't know if the circumstance I'm about to describe is what President Biden meant, but if the shoe fits, wear it, Cinderella. Let me cut to the chase. Mr. George Soros is an oligarch. He's one of the wealthiest people in the world. He's a friend of President Biden's. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, President Biden just gave him, I think, the highest civilian honor that a president can give to a civilian, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Mr. George Soros is buying WWL AM radio in New Orleans. Let me say that again. That may not mean much to you, Mr. President, but it means a lot to my people in Louisiana. Mr. George Soros is buying WWL AM radio in New Orleans. WWL AM radio is practically an institution in my state. It's been around since 1922. 1922. Over 100 years. It's a clear channel. It's what the communications experts call a clear channel Class A station. Its transmitter power output is about 50,000 watts. That's a lot, folks. That's the maximum for commercial AM stations in the United States. It's the lead station on the New Orleans Saints radio network. It's an important station. And Mr. George Soros is buying it. Now, what does that mean, and how did this happen? WWL is owned by a national company called Odyssey. A-U-D-A-C-Y, Odyssey. Odyssey has about 220 radio stations nationwide, one of which, of course, is WWL. Second largest radio network in America. It reaches, I think, 45 different markets throughout our country, Mr. President. 165 million Americans. It's huge. Odyssey borrowed too much money. They took on too much debt. They took on about $1.9 billion worth of debt, and they couldn't service that debt with their revenues. So what did they do? They did what many other corporations do when they can't service their debt. They went into what's called Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Not Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is when they liquidate the company. Chapter 11 bankruptcy is when a company goes into bankruptcy in front of a bankruptcy judge and says, Judge, we want to get all of our creditors and debtors together and restructure our cash flow and our debt so we can come out of this bankruptcy a surviving entity. They went into Chapter 11 with a bankruptcy plan. Mr. George Soros immediately pounced. He, of that $1.9 billion in debt, he bought about $415 million of it, cash on the barrelhead, paid 50 cents on the dollar. One of the tenets of the reorganization was that all the current shareholders would be wiped out. The new creditors would assume equity positions in the company. I know that sounds complicated, and it can be, but really what it means is that the bondholders, one of which is Mr. Soros after he bought $415 million worth of debt, became a shareholder. And Mr. Soros is now the largest single shareholder in Odyssey radio stations, including WWL AM in New Orleans.
Isn't it so ironic that the liberals keep shouting from the mountaintops that the country under Trump is ran by oligarchs, the billionaires are in charge of the world, Elon Musk's doing whatever the heck he wants? Meanwhile, there's people like George Soros in the world who are doing every single thing that they claim Elon is doing. I mean, let's just differentiate these two right now. George Soros buys influence, he buys stations to peddle narratives and agendas that he wants pushed to the youth. Here's a little hint. None of these things that he wants pushed is for the unity of America. He's trying to sow division amongst Americans, Christians versus Muslims, black versus white, rich versus poor. He's trying to constantly divide people. Whereas Elon Musk, the only reason he bought Twitter in the first place was because there was no free speech on any social media platform at the time, and he realized what a grave threat that was to humanity, so he bit the bullet and was willing to spend $44 billion of his own money to preserve humanity as we know it. This is a battle between good and evil. George Soros reminds me a lot of Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life, if you guys have seen it, where every single thing in the town needs to be under his control. He needs to be the one in charge and dictates how other people live their life. That's exactly what Soros and his goons are trying to do in 2025. Biden was never in charge. Soros and his goons were always the ones pulling the strings.
Now, in America, you can't just go do this. Why is that? Because those airwaves on which WWL and the other radio stations broadcast, they don't belong to the radio stations. They belong to you, and you, and you, and you. These airwaves, the spectrum, if you will, they're owned by the American people. And years ago, we created the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. We set it up to be in charge of the airwaves that belong to the American people, to make sure that those airwaves were being used prudently by radio stations. For example, if a radio station is bought by a bunch of foreign nationals or foreign entities, the FCC has got to approve it. For example, anytime a broadcast license, as is the case with Odyssey, is transferred, the FCC has to approve it. So Mr. Soros's purchase of WWL radio and the 219 other radio stations had to go before the FCC. And it did. And it went, the approval for Mr. Soros went through the FCC like green grass through a goose. And it was a party line vote. It was last September. all three Democrats, there are 5 people on the FCC, all 3 Democrats said, let it go. And they short-circuited the normal process. Now, I'm not an FCC expert, and I'm not a communications law expert, but I've read, this has been widely reported, and I've read about it in many reports. Normally, on a deal of this size, when 220 radio stations are being transferred, their licenses, using airways that belong to the American people, and there's a substantial percentage of foreign owners, it would take about a year to get through the FCC. FCC would do a complete investigation. Not this time, no. This time was special. What happened was what some members of the media have called the Soros shortcut. They just got together and rammed it through. Did I mention it was like green grass through a goose? 3-2. Now, the 2 Republicans on the commission, they're screaming the whole time, whoa, Nellie, whoa, whoa. Why aren't we taking this seriously? Why aren't we investigating this? Why aren't we doing our due diligence? They were outvoted, 3-2. You know, when even in a democracy, when you've got the votes, you can make a porcupine like hot peppers if you've got the votes. It doesn't make it right. A number of people petitioned the FCC and said, please don't do this. One of the groups that petitioned the FCC was a group called Media Research Center. The FCC, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, dismissed them. But this is what the Media Research Center said. Quote, their words, not mine. There is no question that George Soros and his affiliated businesses are looking to control these radio stations to advance their particular brand of activism, close quote. And the MRC urged the FCC not to create, quote, a special Soros shortcut, quote, that would circumvent their rules and allow the deal to move forward. They did it anyway. Here's what Mr. Troy A. Miller, NRB president and CEO, said. He said, quote, my words, or his words, not mine, quote, the fact that the FCC is apparently willing to bypass the usual protocols, that means the normal procedures, to get this transaction done just weeks before a presidential election and right after the President of the United States gave Mr. Soros the Presidential Medal of Freedom, seriously undermines the Commission's credibility and raises unwarranted questions of whether administrative processes are being manipulated to exert political interference and preference, end quote. Here's what one of the Republican members of the FCC in dissent said, quote, Commissioner Brendan Carr, who's soon to be chairman of the FCC, now that there's a new sheriff in town. Here's what Mr. Carr said. The Commission's decision today approving Mr. Soros's plan is unprecedented. Never before has the Commission voted to approve the transfer of a broadcast license, let alone the transfer of broadcast licenses for over 200 radio stations across more than 40 markets without following the requirements and procedures codified in federal law. Pass me the sick bucket. This isn't right. But they did it. Now, this is America. You're entitled to believe what you want. If it's legal, you're entitled to do what you want. And Mr. Soros is certainly entitled to his opinion. He is. I don't agree with him, but he is certainly entitled to it in America. I'm not much into this cancel culture, and hopefully we've seen the end of it.
I agree. Soros is welcome to his own opinion, just as you and I are welcome to our own opinions. But the fact of the matter is, the only reason why Soros was able to get through the commission is because the Democrats outnumber the Republicans, and it just seems like 99% of Democrats left in Washington, D.C. just have a hive mind mentality, and they can't think for themselves, and they all have to vote in unison, have no dissenters whatsoever. So although the commission approved it, it does not mean that it's right. Because I'm willing to bet, if you or I had the funds and wanted to buy this radio station and do what Soros is doing, we would have not had the luxury that Soros did by bypassing certain channels in order for it to be expedited. That simply would not happen in a fair environment. I'll tell you exactly why it did happen. Because all of them, they're all part of the same exact club. They all have the same agenda. Democrats don't have a mission for America. They don't want to see prosperity and great things happening. In fact, it seems to me, they just want anti-Trump. Whatever Trump wants, do the opposite. That's not a way to lead. And it goes to show these people just want to sow division and reap chaos all across the country. So I can't even imagine how much worse it's going to get now that Soros is in control of these channels.
But when you're acquiring radio licenses which can influence public opinion, and you're doing it in part, not exclusively, but in part with foreign money, well, that's why we have the SEC. But I want to make this clear. I believe in free speech and free expression. You're not free if you can't say what you think. You're not free if you can't express yourself. And Mr. Soros has that right. But here's where he stands. I want my people in Louisiana to know who's buying WWL radio in New Orleans. Mr. Soros is a billionaire. God bless him. He made his money himself. He has poured much of his wealth into what, in my opinion, are radical causes. He's now working with his son, who I understand is a very smart young man. His name is Alex Soros. Mr. George Soros and Mr. Alex Soros hold some, how should I put this, non-mainstream American beliefs. For example, Mr. George Soros has called the United States, quote, the main obstacle to a stable and just world. Mr. Soros believes that our country is, quote, the main obstacle to a stable and just world. Not China, not Iran, not North Korea, the United States of America. Pass me the sick bucket. Mr. Soros has also said that China has, quote, his words, not mine. China has a, quote, better functioning government than the United States of America. Mr. Soros does not believe that the United States should have secure borders. He once called national borders a, quote, obstacle, end quote, to his plan for widespread immigrant resettlement. Mr. Soros and his family, as you probably know, have spent millions and millions of dollars to elect prosecutors throughout America who believe that violent criminals are the real victims. These prosecutors believe, for the most part, that if a cop has to shoot a criminal, it's always the cop's fault, but if a criminal shoots a cop, it's always the gun's fault. These prosecutors that Mr. Soros has backed with millions of dollars all believe that if you are concerned about crime, you're automatically a racist. Mr. Soros and his son Alex Alex in particular, have called for softer sentences on violent criminals. This is what he has said. I'm quoting his words, not mine. But if we are serious, Mr. Alex Soros said, but if we are serious about ending mass incarceration, we must also rethink our response to crimes that are more serious, including violent ones. Even those who have been victims of violence increasingly do not believe in long-term prison sentences. In short, Mr. Soros, both George and Alex, believe that America would be better off if we had open borders. They believe that if America would be better off, in my opinion, this is how I read their writings, if we ended jails and if we ran our government like the Communist Party of China. I don't agree with that. But Mr. Soros, both of them are entitled to their opinion. But my people in Louisiana are entitled to know whose opinion they're hearing on the radio. And this has not been reported once in Louisiana. Let me say it again. Mr. George Soros, through a expedited procedure, I'm trying to be even-handed here, who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Biden, and who is close to President Biden and all of my Democratic colleagues, on a 3-2 vote at the FCC, has been able to buy over 200 radio stations throughout America, including WWL Radio. And I want my people to know about it. And I want to make sure that it was done legally. I'm not saying it wasn't done legally. I am saying that it looks funny. Not funny, ha-ha. It looks weird the way this was done. It has the aroma of politics. And I hope the new FCC revisits this issue. These licenses and these airwaves do not belong to me or the FCC or to Odyssey or to WWL. They belong to you and you and you, the American people.
You know what? I actually want to have an apology to George Soros. He does have a mission for America. The destruction of America. He does not want America to thrive. He outwardly said America is the biggest obstacle to the world's peace. I'll tell you exactly why he said that. Because this guy wants a one-world government, and you know he's including himself as one of the people who gets to rule over everybody else. Why else would you praise China? China is the most oppressive country in the world today. With social credit score, you can't go anywhere in China without the government knowing where you went. They track everything about you. They know what you're thinking before even you know what you're thinking. I mean, just do the math. Why do you want people coming into the southern border? Because it's going to destroy America. Why do you want criminals out of the jails and into the streets? Because it'll destroy America. Why are you so against everything Donald Trump stands for? Because he's the most pro-America president that we've had in my lifetime, without a doubt, but maybe ever. This guy cares about this country so much, and he wants us to prosper. He wants us to be safe, secure, and he wants to send us into a golden age of prosperity. These people cannot stand Donald Trump because he's fighting back against this globalist agenda to pretty much enslave us all. I find it so funny that George Soros bought all these radio channels, yet nobody was alerted. You want to know why there wasn't an alert? Because he doesn't want you knowing that he's in control of it now. Because if you know what you hear on the news is coming from George Soros, you're going to be more skeptical. If you're just going about your day and you're listening to the radio and it's telling you stuff, most people are going to believe it. They're not going to question it. They're not going to investigate where that came from. They're just going to believe it to be the truth. George Soros and his pack of goons are poison to this country, if you ask me. He has every right to say whatever the heck he wants. But so do I. So do you. So does everybody in this nation. But I'm sure old George doesn't feel that way. I'm sure that guy wants to silence any dissenting opinions, and if he had it his way, it would be done already. But he doesn't have it, especially now that Donald Trump's in charge, and he's got to fight back against these sinister forces because they are not done and dusted yet. They're just hiding. They're waiting for an opportunity to pounce, and that's why we need to strike while the iron's hot. Make sure any politician who's serving in Congress only wants the best for America. We simply cannot allow these Benedict Arnolds to be in D.C. any longer. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this down below. Why do you think George Soros bought all these radio stations? Let me know. Give me your theories. And do you think Alex's son has the same goals as his father, or he's going to have a different approach to it? Let me know. I'd love to know your thoughts. And if you enjoyed, make sure to smash that like, comment, subscribe, and wish you guys nothing but the best. Till next time.